There are moments when the noise of the world fades away, and something within you whispers quietly, "This message is for you." You might not expect it, you might not be ready for it, but deep down, your soul recognizes the voice. That is the moment when God speaks directly to you. Not through thunder, not through miracles, but through silence, through intuition, through a small voice saying, "I'm worried for you, my child." Today, listen carefully, because this message is not random. It has found you for a reason. There comes a moment in every person's life when the silence feels heavier than noise. When you wake up and something within you feels unsettled, like a small whisper that says, "This isn't how it was meant to be." You try to ignore it. You scroll, you talk, you work, you distract yourself, but the whisper keeps returning, softly repeating the same truth: you have forgotten who you are. That is what worries God. Not that you've made mistakes, not that you've fallen, not that you've lost your way, but that in all the chasing, comparing, and surviving, you have drifted away from the essence that He placed within you. When God says, "I am worried," it's not like a human worry filled with panic. It's a divine ache, the kind of concern that a creator feels for what he created with love. Imagine an artist who paints something full of light, color, and meaning, but over time, dust settles on it until it becomes unrecognizable. The artist doesn't stop loving the painting, he longs to restore it. In the same way, God is not disappointed in you. He longs to remind you of the beauty that still exists beneath everything life has layered upon you. There was a time when you were pure energy, when your heart was full of curiosity, gratitude, and quiet strength. You didn't question your worth. You didn't doubt your purpose. You lived with an openness that allowed you to feel both joy and pain without fear. You were connected to life. You were in flow. But then the world taught you things that your soul never needed. The world taught you to compete instead of connect, to prove instead of be, to fear instead of trust. Slowly, your identity became a collection of expectations. What others thought of you, what success should look like, what happiness should feel like. You began to forget the voice within that used to guide you effortlessly. And God saw it happening. He watched as you started to measure yourself by the wrong things, by achievements, by approval, by how many people noticed your light instead of how brightly it actually burned. He saw you trade authenticity for acceptance, truth for comfort, peace for speed, and still He waited. Because the divine never forces itself upon you. It waits patiently until you are ready to remember. Every disappointment, every delay, every heartbreak you've experienced wasn't punishment. It was the universe's attempt to bring you back to your center, back to the truth that you are more than your circumstances. When you forget who you are, you become restless. You feel like you're searching for something but can't name it. You try new things, you move, you change jobs, you seek love, you chase goals. But nothing truly satisfies you, because nothing external can replace the internal connection you've lost. That emptiness you feel isn't a sign of failure. It's a divine reminder that your soul misses home. God worries because you mistake that emptiness for meaninglessness, when in truth, it's an invitation. It's Him knocking at the door of your heart saying, "Return to me. Return to yourself." You may think you've drifted too far, that the light inside you has dimmed too much to be rekindled. But the truth is, the light never goes out. It only gets covered. You have lived long enough carrying labels that were never yours. Not enough. Too late. Too broken. Unworthy. And God looks at you, and He sees none of those things. He sees strength disguised as pain, wisdom hidden in wounds, purpose woven into uncertainty. His worry is not about your failure, it's about your forgetfulness. Because when you forget who you are, you live beneath your potential, and when you live beneath your potential, the world loses a piece of its light. The greatest tragedy is not death, but living without life inside you. You exist, but you no longer feel. You breathe, but you no longer believe. You move, but you no longer flow. That's why God keeps sending you signs, not to scare you, but to awaken you. The sudden changes, the repeated patterns, the people who come and go, they are not coincidences. They are reminders. The discomfort you feel is sacred. It's the soul's way of shaking you awake. You think things are falling apart, but in reality, they are falling into place, into the pattern that leads you back to remembrance. When you look at yourself now, you may see someone who has failed, someone who doesn't meet their own expectations. But God sees a soul in transformation. He sees the fire that life has placed you through not as destruction, but as purification. He knows that sometimes you must be stripped of everything false before you can see what is real. He knows that sometimes losing yourself is the only way to find your true self. And that's why he whispers, "I am worried," because you've mistaken your awakening for chaos, your transition for collapse. The truth is, you are exactly where you need to be for remembrance to happen. You don't need to search far. You don't need to achieve more. You don't need to become someone new. You just need to stop running and start listening. The soul doesn't speak in noise. It speaks in stillness. When you quiet the world long enough, when you stop chasing the next thing and simply sit with yourself, you will start to hear that familiar voice again. It may feel distant at first, like an echo, but it's there. It's always been there. And when you finally recognize it, you'll realize that God was never far away. He was within you, waiting for you to listen. The path of remembering who you are begins with honesty. Honesty about the ways you've hidden yourself, about the fear that drives your choices, about the loneliness that hides beneath your distractions. You cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot return home while pretending you're already there. God's worry is that you've become too comfortable with pretending. Pretending to be strong when you're tired. Pretending to be happy when you're empty. Pretending to have faith when you've quietly lost it. But the divine doesn't need your perfection. It needs your presence. It needs you to show up as you are, even if all you can offer is confusion and tears. That is where transformation begins. When you say, "God, I feel lost," He doesn't turn away, He smiles. Because that's the moment you've stopped lying to yourself. That's the moment your heart opens enough for light to enter again. The first step back to who you are is not confidence. It's surrender. It's saying, "I don't know how to find myself again, but I'm willing." And willingness is all God needs to begin His work within you. He doesn't ask for perfection. He asks for presence. He doesn't demand strength. He offers it. Think of the seed buried in the soil. In darkness, it could easily believe it's been abandoned. But that darkness is not its end. It's its beginning. You too are being planted, not buried. The worry of God is not that you're in darkness. It's that you might give up before realizing the light you're becoming. He knows your potential even when you can't see it. He knows your purpose even when you feel directionless. And He knows that the same light that created galaxies also burns quietly within your chest. You just need to remember, every time you speak negatively about yourself, every time you think you are unworthy of peace or love, imagine how the Creator feels hearing His creation curse itself. You were made in His image. How could you ever be anything less than divine? Yet, you've allowed the opinions of others to define you. You've allowed your mistakes to name you. You've allowed your past to limit you. And God watches, not in anger, but in sadness, because you've traded truth for illusion. You've accepted the lie that you are small, but you were never small. The same force that moves the oceans and raises mountains flows through your veins. Remember the times you overcame what you thought would break you. Remember the nights you cried and still found strength to rise the next morning. Remember the moments you gave love even when your heart was aching. Those weren't accidents. Those were glimpses of who you truly are. Resilient, compassionate, divine. You think God has forgotten you, but He's been there in every silent victory, in every moment of courage no one saw. He has been whispering, "I'm still here. You still matter." When you start to remember who you are, you'll begin to see life differently. You'll stop needing validation because you'll understand that your worth was never up for debate. You'll stop chasing temporary highs because peace will become your natural state. You'll stop fearing endings because you'll see them as transformations. You'll move through life with quiet strength, not loud confidence, but the kind that comes from alignment. The kind that says, "I know who I am, and I trust where I'm going." God's worry is beginning to ease the moment you start to awaken. The moment you look at yourself not through guilt, but through grace. The moment you stop apologizing for being yourself and start honoring the soul He designed. You are not too late. You are not too lost. Every breath is another chance to remember. The universe itself is conspiring to help you return. The conversations you have, the books you read, the signs you see, the coincidences that repeat, they are all threads pulling you back to your true self. Pay attention. The divine works quietly but consistently. And when you finally stand in front of the mirror and see yourself with new eyes, eyes that see not just flesh, but spirit, you will understand why God worried. Because He saw your light dimming in a world that desperately needs it. But now, as you remember, that light grows again. And your awakening doesn't just heal you, it heals others too. Because when one soul remembers, it becomes a mirror that helps others remember as well. So today, take a breath. Not the shallow breath of survival, but the deep, conscious breath of presence. Feel life moving through you. That is God's reminder that you are still connected, still chosen, still loved. Whisper softly to yourself, "I am more than my fears. I am more than my past. I am the reflection of the divine." And let those words dissolve the noise, the doubt, the guilt. This is what God wants for you. Not perfection, not performance, but remembrance. To walk through life aware of your own sacredness. To look at others and see reflections of the same light. To live with the quiet confidence that nothing can separate you from what you truly are. When you remember that, the divine worry transforms into divine joy. Because the Creator rejoices when creation awakens. And when that happens, when you finally return to yourself, you'll realize that God was never far away, never silent, never absent. He was within you all along, waiting patiently for you to remember. Waiting for you to stop running and simply say, "I am home." But that is the moment the universe exhales. That is the moment heaven smiles. That is the moment you become whole again. Not because you found something new, but because you finally remembered what was never lost. There comes a point in life when silence becomes uncomfortable. We fill every empty moment with noise, music, scrolling, talking, planning, worrying, as if silence itself is something to escape. But it is in that silence where God speaks the loudest. When the distractions fade, when the voices of the world grow quiet, that is where His voice can finally be heard. And yet, most people no longer reach that stillness. They move from one thought to the next, one problem to another, one desire after another, without ever pausing to listen. That is why God says, "I am talking to you, but you have stopped listening." You see, listening is not just the act of hearing. It's the art of presence. It's not about using your ears, it's about opening your heart. You cannot hear God when your heart is closed. You cannot recognize His whispers when your mind is crowded with fear, worry, and noise. God speaks through many forms, sometimes through words, sometimes through silence, sometimes through loss, sometimes through unexpected blessings. But when you are consumed by the noise of life, you miss the subtle language He uses. We live in a time where people constantly seek signs, miracles, and proofs of divine presence. Yet, when the sign arrives, they dismiss it as coincidence. When the miracle unfolds quietly, they overlook it. When life shifts direction unexpectedly, they call it misfortune instead of guidance. God says, "I am not silent. You have simply forgotten how to listen." Every time your plans fail, every time a door closes, every time someone leaves your life, these are not random events. These are divine messages spoken in a language beyond words. To truly listen, you must become empty. The ego loves to fill space. It loves to analyze, label, and control. But the divine voice doesn't compete with noise. It waits for stillness. When your mind is full of noise, there is no space left for divine wisdom to enter. The greatest act of faith is learning to be quiet enough to hear what your soul already knows. You don't need to shout your prayers to be heard. You don't need to chase God across the heavens. You only need to be still long enough for His presence to rise within you. Listening to God doesn't always come in moments of peace. Sometimes it comes through pain. When life strips you of what you thought you needed, when the things you depended on fall apart, that's when His voice becomes clearer. Because in your brokenness, your resistance weakens. In your silence, your defenses fade. Pain, though uncomfortable, has a way of tuning you into a higher frequency. The frequency of surrender. And in that surrender, you hear what you were too busy to notice before. God speaks through your intuition, that quiet knowing that doesn't shout but simply is. You felt it before, that inner pull, that strange certainty that something is right or wrong, even when logic disagrees. That is not just instinct, that is communication. That is divine guidance in its purest form. Yet, how often do you ignore it? How often do you say, "It's just my imagination," or "I'll think about it later"? God doesn't force His messages upon you. He whispers them into your awareness and leaves you with choice. And when you ignore them, life becomes louder until you have no choice but to listen. That's why challenges appear. That's why you keep meeting the same situations again and again. Because you still haven't listened to what they came to teach you. Every repeated pattern in your life is not bad luck. It's unlearned wisdom. When God wants your attention, He speaks softly at first, through intuition, through feelings, through subtle signs. If you ignore those, He speaks louder, through discomfort, through obstacles, through people leaving. If you still refuse to listen, He speaks through stillness, by taking away everything that distracts you until all that remains is you and Him. Sometimes, the greatest act of love from God is the removal of what keeps you deaf. The job you lost, the relationship that ended, the opportunity that disappeared. They may have been divine interventions disguised as disappointments. You see, God doesn't always speak to comfort you. Sometimes He speaks to awaken you. His voice may not always tell you what you want to hear, but it always tells you what you need to hear. And if you listen deeply, even in the pain, you will hear love. But listening is not passive. It requires attention, humility, and trust. To listen to God, you must silence the voice of fear that keeps interrupting Him. Fear always wants control. It wants answers now, outcomes now, clarity now. But the divine voice flows only where trust exists. You cannot demand answers from God. You can only align yourself to receive them. Listening is not waiting impatiently for a reply. It is resting in faith, knowing that what you need to know will be revealed when the time is right. Think of the ocean. When the water is still, it reflects the sky perfectly. When it's disturbed, it distorts the reflection. The same is true for you. When your inner world is calm, you reflect divine truth clearly. When you are restless, anxious, and distracted, everything becomes distorted. That is why stillness is not weakness, it is strength. It is in stillness that divine clarity emerges. God's guidance is always available, but it is received only in silence. Every morning, before you check your phone, Before you think about your to-do list, take one deep breath and simply say, "Speak, I am listening." Those words open a space in you that the world cannot occupy. You'll begin to notice things differently. A random phrase you hear will suddenly carry meaning. A stranger's